December 1944. A German Panther commander looked through his sight and saw the easiest target in Europe, a Sherman. Same height, same rounded turret, same familiar American shape crawling out of smoke and snow. The range was a little under 900 yards. For 2 years, that distance had meant safety. German manuals said it. Training officers said it. The recognition cards in every Panzer crew room said it. At that range, a Sherman could burn. But it could not kill a Panther from the front, so the commander gave the order. Fire. The first round hit an American tank and punched through. Flame came out of the hatches. The Panther crew did what crews do when doctrine proves itself. They relaxed. Then another Sherman appeared. Same silhouette, same enemy, same mistake. The German gunner began to settle his crosshairs, but the Sherman fired first. This time, the shot did not bounce. It struck the Panther's gun mantlet. The armored shield German crews trusted more than almost anything on the vehicle. The steel did not shrug it off. The steel opened. Inside the Panther, a burst of fragments crossed the fighting compartment faster than any man could understand what had happened. A tank that had been safe by the book was dead in 6 seconds. The after-action paperwork would later say the Panther had been destroyed by a Sherman. Just a Sherman. That was the most dangerous part. Because the German crew had recognized the tank. They had not recognized the war inside it. This is the story of how the United States changed the meaning of the Sherman without changing the shape of the Sherman. Not with a wonder weapon, not with a brand new tank, not with some enormous machine the enemy could see coming from a mile away. With a longer 76-millimeter gun, with wet ammunition stowage, with a smoother HVSS suspension, and with a small, rare tungsten-core round most American tank crews carried like a loaded secret at the bottom of the rack. The round was called M93 HVAP, high-velocity armor piercing. To the men loading it under fire, it was simpler than that. It was the one you saved. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand how low the Sherman's reputation had fallen before it changed. North Africa, 1942. The first American tank crews learned the hard lesson in dust. The Sherman was reliable. It was easy to build. It could drive for days. It could be repaired by men working from a truck with a wrench and a flashlight. But when German anti-tank guns found its side armor, the old dry ammunition racks turned the inside into a furnace. The shells were stored along the hull walls, exactly where hot fragments liked to arrive. One penetrating hit could ignite propellant in seconds. The British had already given burning Shermans ugly names. Ronson, Tommy Cooker. Names that sounded like jokes until you heard men screaming from inside steel. And then came the Panther. The German Panther was not just another tank. It was a correction. Sloped frontal armor. A long, high-velocity 75-millimeter gun. Good optics. A profile designed to kill at range. Its front plate was 80 millimeters thick, sloped back at an angle that made it behave like far more steel than the number suggested. A standard Sherman 75-millimeter round could hit that plate and lose the argument instantly. It did not matter if the crew was brave. It did not matter if the gunner was calm. It did not matter if the shot felt perfect when it left the barrel. Against a Panther's front, The old Sherman shell usually became noise. The Panther's shell did not have the same problem. A Panther could open a Sherman at ranges where the Sherman crew was still trying to decide if they had a target at all. By Normandy, American tankers were sending back the kind of reports nobody wanted to read. The 75 was not enough. The new 76mm gun was better, but with ordinary armor-piercing ammunition, it still did not reliably solve the Panther from the front. Crews were being told one thing by procurement tables and another thing by smoking wrecks in hedgerow country. At headquarters, the argument became uncomfortable. The Army had not ignored the problem. It had built a new gun. It had put that gun into Shermans. It had improved ammunition stowage, so hits were less likely to turn the tank into a torch. But the Panther had exposed a narrow, deadly gap. At the exact distance where German crews were trained to feel safe, many American crews still had to maneuver for side shots. In open ground, that was not always possible. In a village street, there might not be time. The answer came from physics, not heroics. A normal armor-piercing shell tries to defeat armor with a full-caliber steel projectile. Big mass, big diameter. Energy spread over a large impact face. The M93 HVAP thought differently. Inside a lightweight metal body sat a dense tungsten carbide core. Tungsten was hard. Tungsten was heavy. Tungsten was scarce enough that no sane army would waste it on ordinary targets. But fired from a 76mm gun at roughly 1,036 meters per second, that small core carried terrifying focus. It did not need to shove a wide plug through steel. It needed to concentrate the blow into a much smaller point. At 500 yards, the round could defeat roughly 157 millimeters of armor under standard test conditions. At 1,000 yards, it could still defeat around 135. Those numbers mattered because Panther crews were trusting a different set of numbers. A Panther mantlet, a Sherman 76, a safe engagement range, an enemy that looked like yesterday's enemy. The M93 changed the last line without changing the first three. That was why the recognition card became dangerous. It still showed a Sherman. And it was not lying about the silhouette. It was lying about what the silhouette meant. The first problem was making the round at all. Tungsten was not lying around in crates waiting for America to discover it. It had to be mined, bought, shipped, refined, machined, inspected, packed, guarded, and sent across an ocean already crowded with everything else a world war needed. A standard armor-piercing shell was cheap by comparison. An HVAP round was a specialist instrument. You did not fire it at a barn. You did not fire it at a truck. You did not fire it into a tree line because you were angry. You saved it for the thing it existed to kill. That is why early allocations were so small. Tank destroyer units received priority because their job was already tank killing. M10s and M18s needed the shot badly. The 76mm Sherman battalions got the rest. Inside a combat Sherman, the ammunition load might contain around 70 rounds. Most were high explosive. Some were ordinary armor-piercing. A few were smoke. And then, set apart because every man in the turret knew they were different, there might be only 4 to 8 HVAP rounds. 4 to 8 chances. Not enough to change a whole campaign by themselves. enough to change the moment when a Panther commander believed he was untouchable. September 1944. Near Ericourt, in Lorraine, German panzer brigades moved through fog and broken farmland with new Panthers and old confidence. On paper, the Panther should have owned that kind of fight. Open country, long sight lines, superior frontal armor, a gun that had already built its reputation in blood. But the American crews had several advantages the German reports did not know how to measure. They had better radio coordination. They had artillery and tank destroyers tied into the fight. They had commanders who knew the ground. They had crews who had learned not to play the German game unless the terrain made the rules different. And some of their 76mm guns now had HVAP. German tanks began taking penetrations from ranges their crews had been trained to consider safe. Not every kill was tungsten. Not every Sherman had the round. Not every German loss came from tank gunfire. War is never that clean. But the pattern was ugly enough to disturb anyone willing to see it. German after-action explanations leaned on fog, inexperienced replacement crews, poor coordination, terrain, American air power. Those things were real, but they were not the whole truth. The invisible variable had entered the battlefield. And because it was invisible, the German system did what systems often do when new evidence threatens old confidence. It explained the evidence away. No new tank shape forced a new German manual. No captured monster appeared in a parade of Allied equipment. No commander looked through binoculars and said, "That is not a Sherman." It was a Sherman. That was the trap. The United States had not replaced the familiar outline. It had upgraded the inside. A better gun, safer stowage, wider tracks, a suspension that rode smoother over torn ground and snow, and in a few racks, a round that turned a Panther's safe distance into a rumor. By December, that rumor was waiting in Belgium. Operation Autumn Mist began on December 16, 1944. Hitler threw his last great armored offensive into the Ardennes. The plan needed speed. It needed surprise. It needed narrow roads through forests to stay open. It needed American lines to crack fast enough for German armor to reach deep objectives before fuel, weather, and Allied reaction caught up. On the northern shoulder of the attack, German units drove toward the twin villages of Krinkelt and Rocherath, stone houses, frozen streets, tree lines, smoke, white fields. Roads too narrow for the dream of maneuver warfare, Germany still imagined it was fighting. The German armor that entered that ground carried more than shells and fuel. It carried memory. It remembered Poland, France, Russia, Tunisia, Normandy. It remembered Sherman's burning. It remembered American crews bailing out after hits that looked almost routine. It remembered a world in which the Panther stood outside the Sherman's reach and made decisions from a safe distance. Memory is useful in war, until the enemy changes faster than memory does. Inside the American positions, Sherman crews waited behind walls, hedges, and folds in the ground. Some had older tanks. Some had 76mm guns. Some had Easy Eights. The M4A3E8 was not a new species. It was still a Sherman. But the nickname mattered because the vehicle did what American industry did best. It did not become perfect. It became better in layers. The 76mm gun gave more reach. Wet ammunition stowage reduced the chance of catastrophic ammunition fires. The HVSS suspension widened the track system and improved how the tank handled broken ground. In mud and snow, that could mean a steadier ride, less bogging, and a gunner who had a little more control in the seconds before firing. None of that showed clearly on a recognition card at combat distance. A Panther crew saw the general outline. The outline said old enemy. The steel inside said new problem. The fighting in and around Crinkled Rocherath did not look like a clean duel from a weapons manual. It was close, ugly, confused, crowded with infantry, tank destroyers, artillery observers, bazooka teams, roadblocks, and tanks backing through smoke between buildings. That mattered, because German armored doctrine loved distance and field of fire. The village took both away. Panthers that were deadly in the open became long, heavy machines trying to turn under fire in streets built for carts and farm wagons. American defenders forced angles. They aimed from cover. They waited until confidence became exposure. And when a Panther presented the right target at the right range, the loader reached for the round everyone had been saving. There is a particular kind of fear that arrives too late. It is not the fear before battle. It is not even the fear when the first shell passes overhead. It is the fear after your mental model breaks. A Panther crew knows a Sherman has fired. They know where the sound came from. They know the range should have protected them. Then the mantlet cracks. The turret fills with fragments. The radio dies in a burst of static, and in the last seconds, the crew is not thinking about tungsten or penetration tables or supply chains from the Andes to American factories. They are thinking one thing. That was not supposed to happen. That thought spread slowly, because the evidence did not arrive in a form German headquarters could easily digest. A destroyed Panther did not come with a label explaining the round that killed it. The wreck said combat loss. The report said Sherman. The staff officer saw terrain, weather, poor infantry support, crowded streets. All of those were plausible. That was the second trap. The truth did not have to hide perfectly. It only had to hide inside enough other explanations that a tired headquarters could keep believing the old one. The same pattern had appeared before. In Normandy, the German system had underestimated the speed of American adaptation. In Lorraine, it had underweighted the combined effect of radios, artillery, aggressive local command, and improved ammunition. In the Ardennes, it paid for that failure on frozen roads. The Panther was still dangerous, that must be said clearly. No American crew climbed into a Sherman and felt invincible. No HVAP round made German armor harmless. No Easy Eight erased the fact that a Panther could kill a Sherman first if it saw first and hit first. The change was narrower than myth, and more important than myth. The Sherman did not need to become a Panther. It needed to stop being helpless in the Panther's favorite sentence. At this range, the Sherman cannot touch us. The M93 made that sentence unsafe. That is what changed the battlefield. Not because every American tank suddenly carried unlimited tungsten. They did not. Not because every gunner fired perfectly. They did not. Not because German armor became weak. It did not. The change was psychological, tactical, and mathematical all at once. The German crew could no longer look at a familiar silhouette and know the answer before the first shot. That uncertainty cost time. In armored combat, time is life. Farther south, the same upgraded Sherman family was proving something else near Bastogne. Creighton Abrams and the 37th Tank Battalion of the 4th Armored Division pushed through snow, roadblocks, artillery, and German defensive positions to open a corridor into the besieged town. The story is often told as willpower, and it was willpower. But machines make willpower possible or impossible. A tank that cannot start cannot be brave. A gun that cannot kill the obstacle ahead cannot be aggressive. A suspension that cannot cross the ground turns orders into wishes. The Sherman's greatest advantage had never been that it was the heaviest or the best armored tank on the battlefield. It was that America could build it, ship it, fuel it, repair it, upgrade it, and keep it moving while Germany's beautiful machines starved for fuel and parts. That is why the Easy Eight mattered beyond any single duel. It represented an industrial style of warfare the German recognition card was not built to understand. Germany looked for new shapes. America often changed functions. The hull might look familiar, but the ammunition stowage was safer. The gun might look only slightly longer from a distance, but the round in the breech was different. The tracks might not impress a battlefield observer, but the ground pressure changed how the tank moved through winter terrain. The radio net and artillery coordination around it changed what the tank could do as part of a unit. The silhouette stayed mostly the same. The system around it did not. By early 1945, the German armored force in the West was shrinking. Not from one cause, from all causes at once. Combat losses, fuel collapse, air attack, broken rail lines. Spare parts that never arrived. Crews with less training than the men they were replacing. Units rebuilt on paper faster than they could be rebuilt in reality. Against that, the American armored force kept receiving tanks, crews, fuel, parts, and ammunition. HVAP remained scarce compared with ordinary shells. But it was no longer just a rumor at the bottom of a crate. More units knew how to ask for it. More crews knew when to save it. More commanders understood that it gave them a narrow but real answer to heavy German frontal armor. A narrow answer is still an answer. The German army had built much of its armored confidence on recognition. Identify the enemy. Know the gun, know the armor, know the distance. Act before he can. That system works when the enemy's appearance and capability move together. It fails when capability changes faster than appearance. That was the lesson written in burned Panthers across Belgium and Lorraine. The problem was not that German tankers were stupid. Many were skilled. Many were experienced. Many were doing exactly what their training told them to do. That was the tragedy. The training had been right long enough to become dangerous. The old Sherman had deserved much of its reputation. Early ammunition fires were real. Undergunning against Panthers was real. The fear inside American tank units was real. But reputations freeze faster than machines do. A reputation can stay in 1942 while a factory keeps working into 1944. Detroit did not wait for the German manual to catch up. American ordnance officers did not wait for every objection to disappear. Tank crews did not wait for a perfect vehicle. They took the imperfect one and kept forcing improvements into it until the enemy's confidence became outdated. That is the part of the story that gets lost when people ask the wrong question. They ask whether the Sherman was better than the Panther. On a clean chart, in a fair duel, from the front, across open ground, the answer often flatters the Panther. But wars are not clean charts. Wars are fuel columns, rail yards, repair depots, radio nets, training cycles, ammunition allocations, bad weather, frightened loaders, and the 10 seconds after a commander realizes yesterday's answer no longer works. The Panther was a formidable tank. The Sherman was a formidable system. And in 1944, the system learned how to hide a new answer inside an old outline. Imagine the route of one tungsten round, or out of the ground, refined under pressure, machined to tolerance, packed into a complete cartridge, loaded into a crate, stamped with instructions not to waste it, shipped across the Atlantic, moved through depots, issued in small numbers, carried in a tank that looked too ordinary to frighten the wrong man. Then, in a Belgian village or a Lorraine field, a loader's hand finds it in the rack. The breech opens, the round slides in, the commander gives the order, and a Panther crew learns in one violent instant what a supply chain has been building for a year. That is not the romance of war. It is the machinery beneath the romance, the hidden labor, the hard material, the boring memo, the dangerous approval signature, the crate nobody photographs, the ammunition nobody talks about, because if it works, the report will only say the enemy tank was destroyed by a Sherman, just a Sherman. After Europe, the principle did not die. High-velocity penetrators became the future of tank killing. Tungsten cores, then new alloys, then depleted uranium rods, light carriers, dense penetrators. Kinetic energy focused into smaller and smaller impact faces. The details evolved. The idea remained brutally simple. A hard, dense object moving fast enough can make armor discover its own limits. But the larger lesson was older than any shell. Never trust the outline more than the evidence. Korea would prove it again. Old Shermans pulled from depots, fought tanks their enemies believed should outclass them. Israeli engineers would later rebuild Sherman hulls with new guns and keep them dangerous, long after the world had decided the shape was obsolete. Again and again, the same principle returned. The enemy reads the silhouette. The silhouette lies. In December 1944, a Panther commander did not die because he failed to identify a Sherman. He identified it perfectly. That was the fatal error. He knew what it had been. He did not know what it had become. The recognition card in his mind was clean, confident, and outdated. The tank in front of him was not. The card had named the machine. It had not named the change.